Part 1, Book 1, The History of a Family. 1. Fyodor Karamazov. Fyodor Karamazov. Alexei Karamazov was the third son of Fyodor Karamazov, a landowner well known in our district in his day, and still remembered among us because of his gloomy and tragic death, which happened 13 years ago, and which I shall describe in its proper place. 13. Not a lucky number for the present. I will only say that this landowner, in quotes, for so we used to call him, although he hardly spent a day of his life on his own estate, was a strange person, yet one fairly frequently to be met with, a despicable, vicious man, and at the same time senseless. But he was one of those senseless people who are very capable of looking after their affairs and apparently after nothing else. Fyodor Karamazov, for instance, began with next to nothing. His estate was of the smallest. He ran to dine at other men's tables, fastened on to them as a toady, and at his death had 100,000 rubles in hard cash. Rubles? What the hell's a ruble? Is that like paper money, or is that like a ruby? This is probably paper money, right? He's got a bunch of pieces of paper that ain't going to be worth shit after the Ukrainians whip the shit out of the Russian people. I mean, they have a right to defend themselves. They got a natural right to defend themselves. And everybody else in the world have a natural right to assist them in their defense. Yet one fairly frequently to be met with a despicable, vicious man, and at the same time senseless. But he was one of those senseless people who are very capable of looking after their affairs and apparently after nothing else. Fyodor Karamazov, for instance, began with next to nothing. His estate was of the smallest. He ran to dine at other men's tables, so he's a fucking toady. Fastened on them as a toady, and at his death had 100,000 rubles in hard cash. Hard cash. So gold, silver, rubles, actual fucking rubies. Hard cash. Cash. What's hard? Like fucking money, like coins? Or cold hard cash, like fucking $100 bill, whole cold hard $1,000 bill. At the same time, he was always one of the most senseless, fantastic men in the whole district. I repeat, it was not stupidity. The majority of these fantastic men are shrewd and intelligent enough, but just senselessness. And a peculiar national form of it. He was married twice and had 3 sons, the eldest Dmitri by his first wife, and 2, Ivan and Alexei, by his second. Fyodor Karamazov's first wife, Adelaide, I don't fucking know how to say that. Adelaide, belonged to a fairly rich and distinguished noble family, also landowners in our districts, the Miusovs. How it happened that an heiress, who was also a beauty and moreover one of those vigorous, intelligent girls so common in this generation, but sometimes also to be found in the last, could have married such a worthless wretch as we all called him, I won't attempt to explain. I knew a young lady of the last romantic generation who, after some years of a strange passion for a gentleman whom she might easily have married at any moment, invented countless obstacles to their union and ended by throwing herself one stormy night into a deep river from a high bank, almost a precipice, and so she died entirely to satisfy her own whim and to be like Shakespeare's Ophelia. If this precipice, a chosen and favorite spot of hers, had been less picturesque, if there had been a prosaic flat bank in its place, most likely the suicide would never have taken place. This is a fact, and there probably have been a few similar cases in the last 2 or 3 generations. There have probably been a few similar cases in the last 2 or 3 generations. Adelaide Miusov's marriage was also no doubt an echo of other people's ideas and was due to the irritation caused by lack of mental freedom. She wanted perhaps to show her feminine independence to override class distinctions and the despotism of her family. And her imagination persuaded her, we must suppose for a brief moment, that Fyodor Karamazov, in spite of his parasitic position, was one of the bold and ironical spirits of that progressive age, though he was in fact an ill-natured buffoon and nothing more. What gave the marriage piquancy was that it was preceded by an elopement and thus greatly captivated Adelaide's fancy. Fyodor Karamazov's position at the time made him specifically eager for such an undertaking, for he was passionately anxious to advance himself in one way or another, to attach himself to a good family and to obtain a dowry, which was an alluring prospect. As for mutual love, it did not exist apparently either in the bride or in him. In spite of Adelaide's beauty, this was perhaps unique in the life of Fyodor Karamazov, who was always of a sensuous nature and ready to run after any female in the slightest encouragement. Adelaide, however, seems to have been the only woman who had no particular appeal for him. Immediately after the elopement, Adelaide discovered that she had no feeling for her husband but contempt. The marriage showed itself in its true colors with extraordinary speed. Although the family accepted the elopement quickly and apportioned the runaway bride her dowry, the husband and wife began to lead a most disorderly life, and there were everlasting scenes between them. It was said that the young wife showed infinitely more generosity and dignity than Fyodor Karamazov, who, as is now known, got hold of all her money up to 25,000 rubles as soon as she received it, so that those thousands were lost to her forever. The little village and the rather fine town house which formed part of her dowry, he did his best for a long time to transfer to his name by means of some deed of conveyance. He would probably have succeeded, merely from Adelaide's moral fatigue and desire to get rid of him, and from the contempt and loathing he aroused by his persistent and shameless demands. But fortunately, Adelaide's family intervened and checked his greediness. It is known for a fact that frequent fights took place between the husband and wife, but rumor had it that Fyodor Karamazov did not beat his wife, but was beaten by her, for she was a hot-tempered, bold, dark-browed, impatient woman possessed of remarkable physical strength. Finally, she left the house and ran away from Fyodor Karamazov with the destitute divinity student, leaving Dmitri, a child of 3 years old, in her husband's hands immediately. Following this, Fyodor Karamazov introduced a regular harem into the house and abandoned himself to orgies of drunkenness. In the intervals, he used to drive all over the province, complaining tearfully to everybody of Adelaide's having left him, going into details too disgraceful for a husband. A husband to mention in regard to his own married life would seem to gratify him and flatter his self-love most, was to play the ridiculous part of the injured husband and to parade his woes with embellishments. One would think that you got a promotion, Fyodor Karamazov. You seem so pleased in spite of your sorrow, some said, making fun of him. Many even added that they thought he was glad of a new chance to play the buffoon, and that it was simply to make it funnier that he pretended to be unaware of the spectacle he was making of himself. But who knows? It may have been simplicity. At last he succeeded in getting on the track of his runaway wife. The poor woman turned out to be in Petersburg, where she had gone with her divinity student, and where she had thrown herself into a life of complete freedom. Fyodor Karamazov at once began bustling about, making preparations to go to Petersburg, but with what object he could not himself have said. He would perhaps have really gone, but having Determined to do so, he felt at once entitled to fortify himself for the journey by another bout of drinking. And just at that time, his wife's family received the news of her death in Petersburg. She had died quite suddenly in a garret, according to one story of typhus, or as another version had it, of starvation. Fyodor Karamazov was drunk when he heard of his wife's death, and the story is that he ran out into the street and began shouting with joy, raising his hands to heaven, "Lord, now lettest thou servant depart in peace." But others say he wept without restraint, like a little child, so much so that people were sorry for him in spite of the repulsion he aroused. It is quite possible that both versions were true, that he rejoiced at his release and at the same time wept for her who released him. As a general rule, people, even the wicked, are much more naive and simple-hearted than we suppose, and we ourselves are too. Chapter 2, he gets rid of his eldest son. You can easily imagine what a father such a man would be and how he would bring up his children. His behavior as a father was exactly what might be expected. The Brothers Karamazov, Fyodor Dostoevsky, apparently his best novel, his last novel. He's going to die right after he finishes writing the damn thing, or dictating to Anna, so she wrote it, I think. I don't know how that happened or what happened. But Dostoevsky, I'll talk about Dostoevsky in a second.